Okay, good evening, everyone. Call this October 21st Sammamish Planning Commission meeting to order. First, let's do roll call. So I am Mark Boffman. I'm present. Ratuja Indipere.
Present.
Mike Bresco.
Present.
TC Labby.
Howdy.
Josh Amato.
Here.
Karen Malcolm.
Here.
And Karthik Sitharman.
Yes, here.
Great, thank you. Let's do the meeting accessibility statement, if you would, please. Maybe.
It's coming in just 1 second. Getting the screens organized.
I can always read it if necessary, but you know, somebody would probably rather hear somebody other than me reading it.
Here we go.
Okay, thank you. Pursuant to the Governor's Emergency Proclamation 2025, the city is unable to provide an in-person location for the public to listen to the virtual Planning Commission meeting this evening. Meetings are still accessible to the public and public comment can be submitted. Each speaker is allowed up to 3 minutes for non-agenda comment, 5 minutes if representing an organization, and 7 minutes for agenda public comment. Once you have dialed into the meeting, please virtually raise your hand to indicate you would like to provide public comment. Your mic will remain muted until you are called on during the public comment period. To provide public comment, you may join the webinar via the link https://zoom.us/91078897869. Or to give public comment via mobile or landline telephone, dial the following number: 1-253-215-8782, webinar ID number 910-7689-7869. Thank you.
All right, next is approval of this evening's agenda. Anyone have any comments or changes to the agenda for this evening? Seeing no changes or comments, we'll call the agenda approved by common consent. Approval of the minutes. So actually the last time we met as a commission was September 2nd. Anyone have any changes or comments to the meeting minutes from our September 2nd meeting? I see only head nods no. So let's call the September 2nd meeting minutes approved by common consent. Next, public comment for non-agenda items. So as a reminder this evening, our agenda discussion will be about continuing progress on development regulation updates. So if anyone has comments on things other than that, now's the time. So do we have anyone for public comment on agenda?
Yes, we do. One moment. I am unmuting the first caller. Caller 1, you are unmuted.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. Paul Stickney here. It's been a little while since I've chatted with you guys. I've been fairly active at City Council days. If you've all watched or seen the Tuesday City Council meeting, cool. But if not, there were several relevant topics that I think would be of interest as residents of our city, and of course, as you know, the planning commissioners as well. But a couple high points on the BLUMA EIS. The City Council is going to go for an approach to have a study session and a relatively deep dive on Thursday, October 28th, as a special meeting for only that. And I might not have the date correct. Staff can correct me if I have this wrong, but I believe on the 17th of November is when they're going to be talking about options and where to go. So if there's any comments about the EIS and getting on the record. There's going to be a deeper discussion, and I'm not throwing any stones, but I anticipate that this will be a much deeper conversation than any of the council has engaged in at any of the meetings since this started publicly in July of 2020. It started on a contract in May of 2020 that we learned about in July 2020. There were some very good discussions about legislative priorities, actually quite excellent section, and good conversations about the new financial tools, analytics on the budget, and much discussion on the budget and where cash flows are at. The stormwater regs got passed. So it was quite an interesting meeting, went till nearly 1 a.m. It was quite the
Did you
lengthy
go to that?
meeting, but I'd say some topics of significant consequence if you want to get to the nitty gritty, how infrastructure is dealt with and the cost to manage it, how land use is used, and transportation driver experience, environmental issues, sort of how the holistic mix and the balance of all of it. There's a lot up in the air for influence and discussion as to what direction our community takes on these issues. That's my non-agenda comment.
Thank you, Mr. Stickney. And I will go to our second caller. Caller 2, you are able to give comment.
Hi, this is Mary Wichter. I've lived in Sammamish for 21 years. And for non-agenda, I had two different things. As Paul Stickney ahead of me mentioned, the stormwater regulations were passed by City Council. It was pretty much done without any questions or discussion, and I wanted to thank you for everyone that's been involved in this. The stormwater regulations I'm talking about are the amendments that were kind of administerial and procedural. If someone wants to do a drainage adjustment, that it would be a type 2 instead of a type 1 decision. A type 1 is by the director only, and a type 2 gives public noticing and a chance to give input, and then either the applicant or the neighbors or whatever can appeal to that. So I think that was very well done. I know when it initially came up, I'm not sure what initially started it, but I do know that when it first came up, they were only doing full and large drainage review adjustments for subdivisions and short plats. And through public comment, primarily by me, and also lots of discussion by the Planning Commission, we were able to add in that critical drainage areas would also get the type 2 versus type 1 treatment. And the reason that's important is if you just have a flat piece of land, you shouldn't have the same code for the flat pieces of land as places that are critical drainage areas, which are drains too, and also critical areas like landslide. And also when you have bigger projects or more complex projects, you should also have tighter control. So I was very happy with the code. I thought staff did an excellent job presenting and updating the code. And I think the Planning Commission and all the work that you guys did discussing it was very instrumental in getting a very fine draft to City Council so they could pass it through. And also Mr. Stickney alluded to the length of time that the City Council meetings are taking. And I think that any time the Planning Commission can hash through things and ask really good questions and make discussions, you guys are really doing a service to the code, the city, and helping City Council along in their business. So I wanted to make sure that I thanked everybody for that because I'm a part of it, but what you guys do and how you discuss it and what you recommend is the way that things move forward. And I wanted to thank staff, including David Pyle, whose background is the sun that never sets because he's up after midnight at those meetings too. So the second thing I emailed in after 5 today, but hopefully it'll get forwarded or read. In September 2nd, I had a one-word change. I said, hey, if you're going to say townhouses, why don't you also say condos? And I had done some very deep dive into technically where it appears in the code and why, and I knew that House and Senate bills were trying to make condominiums easier to build. And David Pyle had given one of his little less than a minute gems where he talked about what a condominium is, that it's not an archetype, he called it, So it's not a particular type of housing. It's not like a duplex or an apartment or a series of apartments or anything. It has to do with the ownership use of it. So I thought that was made very clear, and I thought it was important enough. David Pyle has had quite a few gems this last year, and I haven't taken the time to write them up, but that one was so important. I wanted to make sure that it got as part of the record and so that you guys could read it yourselves, because condominiums are ownership and not a housing type. And in the development regulations phase 2, which is also on the agenda for tonight, I had given the same input and said, hey, why are you talking about townhouses and not condos? Again, condominiums are not a multifamily type. They're
My apologies to interrupt, Ms. Wichter. That's all that we have available for this evening.
Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you. And that was our last comment from our callers. Back to you, Chair Boffman.
Thanks, Amber, and thank you, Paul and Mary. Okay, let's move on to our main topic for this evening, which is an update on the current status of development regulations. We've been in phase 2, and I think we're going to talk about phase 3 a little bit. So let's jump into that conversation.
Great. Thank you, Chair. David Pyle, Community Development. With me tonight, I have Evan Fisher from Community Development. We're going to be delivering a brief presentation and opening this up to the Planning Commission for discussion. This is informational only. The main point here is we wanted to, number one, provide an update to the Planning Commission on the status of this really large project that the city is taking on. There are some transformational things happening. As a reminder, the city's had the same code roughly in place since incorporation. There have been some minor nits made here and there. This is the first heavy lift effort to really transform the code from its current format to a different format. So we're wanting to make sure to circle back around with the Planning Commission and make sure you are aware of the status of the project, what has happened and what has not happened, and where it will likely go in the future. And we wanted to give you a primer on that, as the Planning Commission has been and will remain instrumental in this transformation of our code. So with that, there really is no formal ask of you tonight. It's really more informational and sharing of information two ways, feedback you can give us, and information we're going to be giving you as to the status of the project and what the next steps might be. Evan?
Perfect. Thanks, David. And I think that does a great job of handling this first slide, so I'll go ahead and skip ahead. Let's see here. Get things working correctly. All right, so in tonight's presentation, we want to briefly give a recap of the project timeline. We'll update you on what code changes have taken place since you've last seen the code, which I believe was during the public hearing on July 15th. We'll give an overview of the UDC process and give you an update on where we are with the UDC. We'll also talk about what issues the City Council are discussing as part of phase 2. And we'd like to have a conversation with you about the planned unit development section as well as the phase 3 scope. So with that, we'll dive right in and do a project timeline recap. This is, I think, worthwhile because this has been, a long process, and a very comprehensive process, but I think one that has worked well. So I think it's worth taking a few minutes just to remind ourselves of how we got to where we are today. That takes us back to 2018 when phase 1 was completed. And with completion of phase 1 came direction as well as a budget allocation to begin work on phase 2. In the summer of 2020, Framework was hired as our project consultant, and we had our project kickoff. In August of 2020, we held our first community advisory group interviews. These were one-on-one stakeholder interviews. And as a reminder, we had a broad range of stakeholders. They were different community interest groups, community members, as well as members from the development community. So we got a lot of very valuable input and viewpoints. And these one-on-one interviews were largely to uncover themes that should be addressed during the phase 2 development regulations update. In September, they held their first community advisory group meeting where they discussed those themes, reviewed the scope of work and project timeline, and began forming and reviewing the code topic list, which you all became very familiar with during your work sessions. October 6th, the City Council and Planning Commission had a joint meeting where you guys received a project overview and reviewed those code topics as well as the themes discussed as part of the Community Advisory Group stakeholder interviews. And also, and kind of most importantly, you discussed the public engagement plan. One of those items that came out of the engagement plan was the online community survey, which was launched in October of 2020. This was to garner more input from the community to really understand what development issues the community was concerned about. And the data we got from that informed the final scope of work as well as the code topic priorities. The fall of 2020 saw a big sprint effort from the Community Advisory Group with their second, third, and fourth meeting. Intermixed in there was also a Planning Commission meeting. But the takeaway from this block of time really was the work the Community Advisory Group was doing. There was a lot of effort in understanding the problem statements and deciding what outcomes we'd like to see from the development regulations updates, as well as beginning to draft potential solutions to those issues in the code language. All that work kind of led us through the winter and into March 4th, where you guys began your big sprint of work sessions. Through the spring of 2021, I'm sure you'll all remember the long meetings and late nights we spent together reviewing draft code language, coming up with new code language, and really digging into the topic lists. We discussed open space requirements, site planning, neighborhood design, clearing and grading, tree retention, arterial frontages. So a lot of great work was done in this time. And we really pushed our way through that topic list, the low, medium, and high priority topics, which took us into the early summer months. In June, we began to shift away from the code language and drafting code and more into discussing the planned unit development section, as well as looking at the Unified Development Code outline. And that took us into July and lead up to the Planning Commission public hearing on July 15th, where you guys made a recommendation to the City Council. As a reminder, the recommendation included the draft code language, which you all worked so hard on, but also recommended that the planned unit development, the planned unit development section be removed from the draft at this time and considered as a future work item, so we could spend more time really refining that section. And this takes us to September 14th, so just a little over a month ago of this year. The City Council had its first work session. They received a presentation which provided a project overview, and we discussed what the code changes are and how they intend to work before taking questions and feedback from the council. And then just this Tuesday, the City Council held its second work session. During that time, we discussed the minor code changes that took place in between their first and second work session. We gave them an update on the Unified Development Code and had a conversation with them about items to be included as part of Phase 3 scoping. The next steps for City Council is one more work session in November before we have 2 scheduled meetings for public hearing in December. Ultimately, we are shooting for a January 1st adoption of the UDC, and I think we are right on track for that, knock on wood.
So Evan, if I could just make one note here.
Absolutely.
We are currently looking at the dates, December 7th and 21. There is a potential that will change per the direction from the City Council to be December 7th and December 14th. They had interest in moving this up. We're looking at the calendar to make sure that can happen right now, but I wanted to make sure anybody who's watching in the audience is aware that December 21st adoption date, if the council is on track and does take action, it might actually occur on December 14th. Just want to make that point. Thank you.
Thanks, David. So next we'll look at the code changes that have occurred since the Planning Commission saw the draft last on July 15th. First and foremost, we removed the plan unit development section. As I said earlier, that will be something that will be considered as part of Phase 3 and needs some more time with the Commission. We removed the proposal for town center UZDP permits to become a Type 3 process. Those will remain a type 2 process, which is a director's decision, at least until other necessary code changes can be made. We clarified on-street parking standards based on input from our Public Works Department. We clarified references to other stormwater regulations in the neighborhood design section. We modified the maximum length for dead-end streets for consistency with Public Works standards, and we made minor language and code changes based on feedback from the Planning Commission, City Council, and staff. Quickly, I want to remind everyone how the UDC, the process for bringing the UDC together has worked and is working. Currently, all of the city's development regulations live in multiple titles of the SMC, which we can see on the right-hand side of the screen in the green boxes. And what we're doing to construct the UDC is pulling all of the relevant development regulations out of those existing titles and into one clearly organized title, which will be Title 21A, Sammamish Development Code. The final UDC will be the resting place for all of the city's, kind of the one-stop shop for all of the city's development regulations. This is being done as a repeal and replace effort, so any of those titles that have been fully moved into the UDC will be repealed and replaced with Title 21A. And we also want to give you an update on where we are with the UDC. A lot of work has been done since July, and we anticipate a complete draft for the November 16th City Council meeting, which is very exciting. We actually intend to only move forward with the City Council, presenting code language to them in the UDC format, so it has come a long way. The UDC is being handled differently than the rest of the Sammamish Municipal Code, which I'll get into a bit more. But it's designed and managed in-house using Adobe InDesign and a software called Flipping Book or something similar. And it will be hosted on the city's website and have a landing page on the city's website that will provide information about what the UDC is, links to resources, and host a library of past code versions. And also, so going back to Flipping Book, I'd like just to explain that a little bit more. Currently, the Sammamish Municipal Code is hosted on online through a tool called Code Publishing, which is really great for publishing, textual documents. It allows for easy searching through the code. It has intercode links. It allows for easy downloading of sections and sharing of sections. But what it doesn't do as well is present highly visual and designed documents. You'll remember that one of the goals of the UDC is to have a final product that is really user-friendly, cleanly organized, cleanly organized, and something that is really accessible for all users, be it staff or the public or applicants. And Flipping Book allows us to accomplish that. So Flipping Book will retain the full visual look and feel of the final document, but give us the full suite of tools. So allow for full searching of the document. It will have reference links inside as well as out to other sections of the SMC. It allows for very easy sharing, downloading, printing of sections of the code. So it should be a really great tool. And actually, I can give a brief preview of the draft version of the UDC in Flipping Book. So I'll click to that now. So what we're looking at, again, is an early draft that Jeff Arango at Framework put together quickly for the City Council on Tuesday. This will continue to be revised and refined, but this is a good preview of how it will work. So when you land on the page, you'll see the title page.
Evan, are we supposed to be, I'm not sure if we're seeing the right thing.
Oh, yes. Thanks, Mark. I think I need to reshare. Thanks for the heads up. Now you should be able to see the title page. Thanks, Jeff Hoffman. So when you come, you'll land on the title page and then be able to either enter through using the page tools or the table of contents, which again, this is not the final version and needs more work, but it will be able to collapse down into all of the different chapters and code sections. And I'll close this just for screen space. But we can use the embedded links in the document to navigate the code. And so let's go maybe to neighborhood design standards. And as you can see, a lot of the code still has yet to be brought in, but it really is a nice presentation. The layout is clean and simple and very accessible. And I think this will be a really great tool for us to use going forward. And then I'm going to skip ahead to, I believe these are our landscape standards, just to give you a preview of how graphics look within the code in different tables. And so this tool will allow us to retain this look and be just as functional as the rest of the municipal code. So let me switch back to the presentation, and then I will turn it over to you, David, for the next bit.
Evan, can I just ask you, you said it has a robust search function. I mean, to me, that seems like one of the most critical pieces of this. So is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. A good example, a fully working example, can be found through the agenda packet in the city of Raleigh, North Carolina. They use this tool to publish their unified development code. And so for a fully finished working example, it's worth spending a few minutes playing around in that. You can test the search functions, the links. It's pretty awesome. I'm excited that we'll be doing something like this. David?
Thank you. So just to add on a little bit to what Evan was saying about the Unified Development Code, this is a big effort. So it's a big move for us to pull the whole code together and repackage it and republish it on a different platform. That said, you'll see later in this presentation that one of the components of Phase 3 is going to be scrubbing the code for things like word choice, syntax, writing style, because what had happened upon incorporation is those that were setting up the city pulled codes from different areas, mostly King County, but there are different styles in our code that were written at different times for different purposes. And what we're going to try to do ultimately in the long term is to clean it up so that it's got the same style, the same type of word choice, those sorts of things. So it is an ongoing effort that will take us, we're going to be at this for another year or two until we get it into the condition that we want it to be in for the long term. So I'm going to shift gears here, and I'm going to walk through some of the things that the council is currently considering. Throughout this project, one of the things that we had looked at is, if we're going to be making these changes regarding adding design standards and trying to get different outcomes, whereby the landscape is not as manipulated, where builders leave sites untouched until they're going to build homes on them, and where the product that's being built is a little different than what we've seen over the last decade. We really need to also consider what the barriers are to builders for doing that. And what we heard from some of the builders was that one of the reasons why they build a project the way they do today, where they go in and they do all the clearing, they do all the grading, and they lay out the streets, and they set the utilities, and they put in the curb gutter and sidewalks, and then they grade out the pads for homes, is because our code actually requires it. That we currently require that all major improvements be complete prior to final approval of final subdivision. So the issue there is that a builder has to make a massive amount of investment in grading and in installation of utilities, et cetera, prior to actually receiving the new tax ID numbers as part of the division. So one option that we're looking at is, can we allow for bonding to occur in lieu of actually building the infrastructure? And the idea here is that it would allow a project to be phased in, where you could see a few lots be built out at a time. They might have to come in and grade out the road and then do some of the core utility installations, but you wouldn't see them grading out each lot like they do today. It might also allow for individual lots to be sold, for custom homes to be built, a little bit of a different product to be put on it. It is something that's allowed under state law. Other cities do it. We have found that cities, such as Redmond, Kirkland, and Issaquah allow it to happen. So it's something that the council is considering. We think it would be a good tool to add. So what basically would happen is you would reach preliminary subdivision approval, which is where you go to a hearing and a hearing examiner gives you an approval. And you would then go into engineering. And at that point, instead of actually building the improvements, you would be required to go through engineering review, and you would have to show that your engineering can work. And then you would present bond quantity worksheets that are the equivalent, or I think it's a higher ratio value than what for the cost of the improvements. So instead of building it and putting it in the ground, you would financially set it up with a financial guarantee and a performance agreement that you'd actually build out the improvements. And if the builder failed to do that, then the city could, in theory, take the bond and continue building the improvements. Typically, what happens though is the bond serves as leverage, and if a builder defaults on it, then another builder comes in and picks it up and continues with it. I have not, in my time, experienced, other than small projects, taking over a bond for a large project. So it doesn't really happen that often. The idea here is that there would be some criteria around it too. So it would not just be at the builder's discretion as to when they would want to do it. It would have to be when there's a phasing plan that shows that there's some logic as to why they need to do this or want to do this. It would have to demonstrate that phasing and bonding would support the neighborhood design principles and standards. So they're really trying to meet what our code objectives are, what our policy objectives are, and that this is a necessary tool to get them there. It would result in improved development outcomes that further the character of Sammamish, and it would allow for individual lots to remain in a relatively natural state until they're developed, such as limiting tree removal and grading. The idea here is that one of the things that we're challenged by is that builders are building and designing the sites to match the housing product instead of the housing product to match the existing topography and landscape. So hopefully this would allow a shift to occur there where we would start to see a product that is better designed to actually match the existing conditions of the site as opposed to manipulating the site so that it would fit the product they want to put on it, if that makes sense. Next slide. So moving into the plan unit development, this was an item that was removed per the recommendation of the Planning Commission from the code package. We did recognize at that point that there needed to be some additional work done on this, and we do plan to bring this back to you. We are curious if there are any thoughts on sort of what we would want to achieve through the PUD. Like what is it exactly that we're trying to achieve by adding a PUD to our codes? From the staff perspective, a PUD provides for flexibility to a builder who might have a challenging circumstance like geometry or something on a property, or it might provide incentive to a builder to get a little bit of a different product than what they would otherwise be building in the city. An example of that is in Sammamish Homegrown, which is our housing plan. We identify that we have missing middle housing, that we really are in need of a change in product being built in the city to start to build things like 2,000 to 3,000 square foot homes or duplexes or things along those lines that would provide for a different type of choice for people who are wanting to live in the city. So through a PUD, you could, as a commission, work on a code that would incentivize that size housing. So you could say that if a PUD was approved that included duplexes, say two 1,200 square foot units in a duplex, two 2,500 square foot homes, two 3,500 square foot homes, and two 4,500 square foot homes, that maybe you get a 10% bonus density. And what we're trying to do is incentivize that. One of the other things about a PUD that we see as attractive is it allows us to try to create a perimeter effect and design the perimeter of a project so that those that are passing by, the passerby, or those passing by in the community and those members of the community that live adjacent to it or walk by it regularly don't even really know it's there. The idea is that you would blend the edges into the surrounding community and that you would landscape it in such a way that you really wouldn't notice that there's potentially a higher density there or a different product there. Now, for those that move into it, that's their choice. It's your choice to buy into a project like that. So in theory, what you end up with is a superior design that has better landscaping and is blended into the surrounding community to match character better. But it also allows at the same time an increase in diversity of housing choices and also allows for an increase in housing choice, superior design, and it diminishes the effect on the surrounding community that new development typically brings. So there's a lot of benefit to PUDs. Where the PUD came from, and the idea of adding a PUD came from, is from phase 1 of our development regs. When we were talking about changing the code with the council back in 2018, I think it was, the builders were coming out and during public hearings delivering testimony that we basically were creating very difficult conditions for them to build in, and they're losing all their flexibility. And one of the things that we promised the council then was that we would bring back a plan unit development code that might offer some flexibility back to builders if they could meet certain criteria and if they would demonstrate that they are building a superior product. So that's really why the PUD was pushed forward. If there is a choice on the part of the Planning Commission to not recommend inclusion of a PUD in our code anymore, that's something that staff would take on at that point. But I do want to make sure that we're all thinking about what benefits it could bring in terms of diversity in housing and in design. Now, I do remember that this graphic here was one that was not liked by many of the Planning Commission, as this project is one, the Laurels, that some felt really, if you were internal to it, that it really wasn't that great of a design. But what we want to draw your attention to is the perimeter effect that it has and how it's designed, and how, unless you actually drive through it or you live in it, you don't really know that it's there and that it has the density that it does. So that's one of the things we're looking at here. Also, there is an interesting use of property boundaries, if you will, for as to how to integrate homes together and front load some of them and back load some of them. So these are the types of things that you would want to consider when looking at a PUD, is how to make it fit more density in there, but at the same time not appear to have as much density to those outside observers. Is there another slide here, Evan? I can't remember.
Yeah, there are a couple that I think just more explain what PUDs are, but I think you've done well in covering those slides.
Yeah, so rather than reading the slides, I always prefer to try to talk about what my thoughts are on PUDs. But what we really would hope here is that the Planning Commission has an opportunity to provide commentary about PUDs and ask questions about PUDs, so that as we start to scope phase 3 and as we start to consider bringing the PUD back to the Planning Commission, we can kind of get a feel for where we need to focus. And if you wanted us to bring, say for example, some projects that we're aware of in the Puget Sound that might be good examples of PUDs, or maybe provide you a list that are in the east side that you could drive to and experience for yourself and see what they look like. That's something we could do. We're really just wanting to get you, get as much information to you as possible, so that when you do pick this up again, you feel like you have the tools you need for you to work on this and provide the feedback that you want to. So I guess we're looking for a conversation here, and any comments about PUDs, et cetera.
Go ahead, Josh.
So if you were to provide us with a list of locations we can go and look at on the ground to see, that would be super helpful. I would love to do that. I don't know when I'm going into an area if it was a PUD or not. So if you gave us a list to look at, that would be great. One thing about this example here is the concern I have. One of them is the ingress and egress roads. And I know part of what we're working on is trying to increase connectivity. But my concern with having things that are like this, where they're offset and no one knows, is that you create one bottleneck, you create one, maybe two locations for emergency services to get through. So that's a concern I have with developments like this is, and I've seen it wouldn't just be the PUD. There's a lot of them like that in Sammamish. We're really missing a grid pattern that makes it easy to navigate the city. And I think something like this adds to that challenge. And as much as possible, we try to stay away from that in the future. I'm sure that we could design I don't know, but I'm guessing we could design a PUD code that would allow for more of access. So that's my concern, after hearing you talk. Otherwise, I think you've heard my thoughts previously for this. To reiterate, my view would be to kind of spread those houses out and make it more integrated with the community. So you drive by and you do see the development, but it looks like it fits in with the natural area rather than trying to, hide it away from everybody, so that it has more of a community feel. That ends my comments so far.
Anybody else?
So with regard to
Sorry, go ahead.
with regard to the access, that's really a great piece of feedback for us, right? Because recall that in the other bundle of code amendments that we're pushing forward to the council now, we actually are trying to increase connectivity in the city, right? So doing something like this is actually contrary to that. So that's a great point and piece of feedback. So thank you for that, and we'll definitely think about that when we're looking at the different types of projects that we're aware of that are out on the ground. And I think there's a whole variety of things out there for what we could see, and trying to find ones that you like would be helpful for us, because then we could come back with some regulations that might try to mimic what you saw on the ground.
So my comment about this, as I've thought about it a little bit, and I'll be a little bit blunt about this maybe, but I think there's a concern, certainly that I have a concern, that we create this and all we really end up with is more horrible development of 5 and 6 bedroom houses that are 8 feet apart. It's just that we have that exact same product shoved closer together and surrounded by trees so that you can't see it. That's not what we want in any way. We shouldn't create something that results in the same outcome. It's just hidden from view. That's not what I think the community wants. Certainly that's not what I hope for. If we can create this in a way that gets at some of those other objectives, such as housing diversity, so we don't, just have those 5 and 6 bedroom McMansions, we have some other things included, and can articulate how doing this is actually a value to the community. I don't know that we've really, at least from my perspective, we haven't gotten there. All it feels like, and perhaps it's because we're showing the laurels, I acknowledge that that's perhaps part of the problem, but it feels like all we're doing is just taking bad development and shoving it behind a landscaping buffer and saying, hey, great job. But that's not what we want to do at all. I don't think that that's the objective of our efforts to improve the development code within the SFC, so that we want better development. And if it can be integrated in a way that we get better outcomes and better product, along with some landscaping buffers, some natural areas, wildlife, all those sorts of things, that's great. But we can't just hide bad development behind a bunch of trees.
Point taken. And I staff share the same objective. It's just a challenge in writing code that gets you there, right? How do you influence the designer? We recently had a hearing examiner ruling that said that the city is not the designer. So how do we write code that influences the designer through criteria or through standards that ultimately achieves what we're trying to get as a product?
Okay, what other comments do people have about this topic? Mike?
Yeah, just a couple. So I think I heard a comment early, David, maybe I think when you were presenting about whether or not the PUDs would be included in phase 3, and I hope they are. That we were fairly close. There certainly needs to be some fine tuning, but we shouldn't let all that work that's been done go to waste. I recognize what Chair Bachman was saying about, sort of hiding all this density behind a buffer. I'd be interested as we go through this to understand some of the trade-offs between how the buffer also provides protection for the natural environment. So I think there's a little bit of trade-off in how much buffer and how, wildlife and native plants and all of that will be able to thrive. And I absolutely support having more housing diversity. I know from comments that I've heard from a number of people that, aging in place and things like that, that having some diversity of housing is beneficial. And the PUD can be a means, as you were saying earlier, about incentivizing developers to provide those houses that aren't necessarily the McMansion. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you. That is definitely a theme that we hear in the community now. It's become, I think, louder over time that we really need to find a way in this community to shift gears in our housing production and start to see some diversity in choices being offered by builders. And we're really working hard to try and understand the economics of it and how that all works and how we can make that happen. So this is just one tool that might help there. There are others that we're looking at now as well.
Okay, anyone else with comments about planned unit development? Karen, did you have something?
Yeah, I just want to ask, David, when you get the locations of these places that we can look at, could you also supply a graphic like this one on the Laurels? It's really helpful to see that as well. Sometimes when you drive around, you don't get the full effect.
Yeah, definitely. We're going to be, relying on some of our professional networks to reach out, to our counterparts. There are some projects I'm aware of, and they have the site plans for the projects that we could provide you as well. There's a few that I've worked on in Bellevue that I thought were pretty good examples that finally, when they were built, 10 years later after appeals, they were pretty nice. But definitely we'll pull those and make sure that's part of the package that we get out to you.
So I have a couple of questions here. With this planned unit development, with this concept, are we saying that the Laurels type of development cannot happen now with our current code? Or with this concept, how do we envision Laurel type of development would look like? Is there a way saying, hey, here is where we are, this is what our code is forcing us to produce, and with the PUD, we would end up with this type of development? Is there a visual representation of where we are to where we would be going?
So that's a great comment. So if there was a way, so what I'm hearing here is that if there was a way for us to show visually like what the pattern would look like under the code today versus what the pattern might look like under a PUD or a couple of options under a PUD. And the answer to your first question is no, you could not build this under today's code. And there are several reasons for that. Setbacks, lot coverages, just the layout here is not feasible under today's code. But what a PUD generally offers, and it really depends on the language in the PUD and the level of flexibility, is it allows some free-form design on the part of the developer if they can choose, or excuse me, if they can actually demonstrate that it's a superior product, that it's representing certain criteria or it's promoting certain attributes that the community sees as valuable. So PUDs tend to be more design intensive, where the details that go along with them are documented much more closely than a standard subdivision. So for us, a subdivision, that is not something that the city historically has had a lot of control over. We don't have we have not had a lot of criteria or design guidelines in our code, and that is actually one of the things that we are doing right now. It's in front of the city council and that you worked on, is that whole set of neighborhood design guidelines. And the idea there is that we're starting to take more control of what subdivisions look and feel like. The PUD would be something that would allow them to deviate from that, so long as they were still meeting those objectives and making sure that attributes that are highly valuable to the community are brought forward and focused on, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. And whenever we talk about deviation, I think we just need to avoid any backdoor entry phenomena of, what Chair Bachman and Josh Amato kind of alluded to, is what this community doesn't want Sammamish to become. So I think we should also look into the code language that prevents that from happening, maybe in a focused session or something like that.
Great comment. What focusing on what we don't want to make sure that doesn't happen is something that's really important as part of code writing. So yeah, thank you.
Anybody else? TC or Ratuja? I don't think you've said anything, so I'll just check with you.
I don't have anything new to add.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Evan, I think there's another slide here. This one, phase 3 scope. So the next item that we have for you is just an overview of what we have on the tentative list for phase 3. Now, understand that phase 3 is going to be contingent on being added to the city's work plan and having adequate budget made available. So you might see some version of these land on the work plan. Maybe not all of them. Maybe all of them. It just depends on what happens in the next 6 months as we pull together work plans and start to look at our budgets going forward for the next few years. So the first one is the Unified Development Code cleanup and refinement, and that's what I was talking about. Now that we're on this new platform, we're going to want to go through it and scrub it and make sure that everything syncs up and the language is they're using the same voice and is consistent. The plan unit development, we just talked about that. Design review program. This is one that we've heard about from the Planning Commission, we've heard about from the community, that basically would start to require design review for single family homes. And the issue here is that it's very staff intensive, but might also require that a new design review board be set up, or the Planning Commission might serve as the design review board. So there's also an administrative end and quite a bit of cost that goes along with that. But if the city does see that as important, it is something that we could work on. There are cities that do it for certain scale projects. So if you're looking at a subdivision of a certain size, well, then there's design review for homes, or if you're doing multifamily, there's design review. But in some cities that are generally smaller cities or smaller communities, require design review for a new home or a home addition or something along those lines. Bonding for phasing for subdivisions, we'll see if that gets approved now. If it doesn't get approved with this round, phase 2, it'll be added to phase 3 for further consideration. Green building code and sustainability. This is one that we really need to not only look at regulatory changes, but also programmatic changes. We need to look at how to address. We need to look at how we can best address modifying existing housing stock to improve energy efficiency and to better basically modernize our housing stock so that we can ensure sustainability. Affordable housing is a big one. We hear a lot about that regionally, locally. So looking at affordable housing and how to promote that. I think that goes hand in hand with diversity and housing choice. That is a regulatory and a programmatic work item. So, how do we help builders find a way to build housing that meets a certain level of affordability? Because builders are not seemingly doing it on their own right now. So we want to work on that one. That is something that, with the countywide planning changes to state law and changes to the countywide planning policies, that we're going to have to take on as part of our 2024 comprehensive plan update. So we see that getting a head start on that next year might be a good thing for us, so that we have an idea about how we might change policy language in our comprehensive plan in order to be consistent with state law and with countywide planning policies, which is a requirement for our comp plan. Sewer connection requirements. This is an interesting one. We have many homes in the city, especially in areas that are, some of our headwater basins for some of our fish-bearing stream systems that have many homes that are on septic. How do we get those homes off septic and on sewer? Do we want to get those homes off septic and on sewer? This is a big conversation in the community. As those septic systems age, we want to make sure that we have a plan for migrating those homes off of septic systems and putting them on sewer, or they're going to be proceeding with simply replacing their septic systems. It's a water quality issue. Although technology definitely is improving regarding design of septic systems, I think we want to have a candid conversation in the community about what the objectives are in order to ensure, because the Sammamish Plateau Water and Sewer District, and because the Northeast Water District primarily uses well water, we want to definitely take care of our groundwater. So is it really the best practice to be, to have many of the homes in our critical aquifer recharge areas on septic? It's a policy question. And how do we then promote migrating them off septic? Landscape standards for single family residences. Do we want to start down the path of requiring a certain level of landscaping across the city? We currently don't, but there are some cities that have minimum landscape standards. And do we want to start doing that as a city for more uniformity? And in order to, in some neighborhoods, you drive through them that don't have HOAs that are on top of that. You see big shifts in the level of maintenance from one property to another. So I think it's a policy question that we want to get at with phase 3. Then finally, the transition between zones for commercial and residential that allow higher density higher density housing through code updates. So the one question we have is, is there opportunity if we can solve some of our transportation capacity issues and infrastructure issues, and if we can solve some of our school infrastructure issues, moving forward and planning for the future of the city, does the commission and does the community, does the public want to see growth around the existing commercial areas that would be like maybe creating something along the lines of a what's called a transition area that many cities use that allows for, say, duplexes to be built within 1,000 feet of a commercial area, so that it starts to create some walkability, and then you can start to better plan for transportation needs because density is occurring in these areas. It's a conversation that we need to have as a community. It's not something that's going to go anywhere fast. We're not as a department proposing adding something like this. Rather, we're probing as we see the regional trends happening, where Puget Sound Regional Council through Vision 2050 is telling us we're going to be seeing this many people move to the region. King County is telling us we are going to be seeing this many people move to the region. That over time, Sammamish is still going to have pressure for development for people to move to Sammamish. So where does that happen? You know, what does the zoning look like in the city in the long term? This really is a bigger picture conversation that we want to have leading up to our comprehensive plan update, because if we are going to start to make some changes as to how growth occurs in the city, we want to understand that through community conversation, and that would be followed by policy updates in the comprehensive plan update process that's due in 2024. So again, we're not trying to suggest or raise alarm bells that we want to rezone parts of the city. Not what we're saying. We want to have a community conversation about how we want to proceed forward so that it doesn't just do it on its own. If you don't talk about these things and try to manage them going forward, they have a tendency of just doing their own thing, and then you end up with a product that you really don't like, and the community might find that we're not prepared to handle changes in the region that are occurring around us. So with that, if you have any questions on any of these, or if you have things that you'd want to add, or things that you might think are really you don't have any interest in talking about, or that we should probably strike from the list, we're open to that as well.
Mark, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. I clicked it, but I didn't click it right. Anybody have any hot topics to add? Josh?
Sure. I would be curious, as we're going through green building code and sustainability, if we can quantify the impact of the different requirements that we're having. Washington State gets our power from pretty green and renewable resources. And if our other goal is to promote affordable housing, increasing regulation, especially around green building codes right now, it's really expensive to do. And I want to make sure that any changes we make have a measurable impact, and not just on the cost of the house. The other aspect I want to make sure we're clear on is defining what we're talking about when we mean affordable housing, because people hear it and assume things, and I want to make sure that we're clear on what we're actually talking about when we say promoting affordable housing. I'd also like to better understand how the city would be working with our water and sewer districts on promoting sewer connections, because we can regulate it, new connections, but we're talking between a $30,000 and $70,000 bill or lien, or however a homeowner's going to pay for that. So I'd be curious what the impact would be on the ground for homeowners, how we'd work with the water and sewer district, and what that looks like in applying it to the code. So and those are my only comments on what you've proposed here.
Thank you.
Others? Mike?
Yeah, I just also a clarification around the green building codes. David, I think you mentioned something about trying to basically upgrade or transition existing housing stock. So it's not just for the thinking right now isn't just for new construction. Is that okay? It'll be interesting as we get into that. I know that's not part of our topic right now. I just wanted that clarification. And the other thing is around the standards around single family residence. Is that the only thing that's still kind of hanging out there for single family residents? I know this may be showing my ignorance of things that we've already gone through. I know we've done some things around single family, but there's also questions about like how far we go and so forth. So I'm just asking for clarification if there's additional work that needs to be done around code for single family residents.
We feel like we're pretty close to the product that we want with single family. And one of the difficulties is we need to actually see products delivered to understand how it looks and feels when it's finally built. Some of these are more program related. So when we get into landscape standards for single family, there's two angles to that. One is regulatory. When you're building a new home, you have to meet certain landscape standards. The other is are we going to then also require a partner change to add a program that now is a minimum landscape standard that all properties have to meet in the city, right? And that what that does is, if you have an existing yard and maybe you're not a big fan of mowing your lawn and you just let natural growth take over and volunteer blackberry brambles pop up, well, we have a minimum standard that you have to meet, and you have to eliminate and eradicate the invasive colonizing blackberry bramble. So it's a policy question for the commission. Some people in the community we've heard from would love to have this standard, a minimum landscape standard. Others would not, because it's overreach on the part of government in their minds. It just depends. So we're trying to feel out, as Sammamish grows in population and as we see infill occur, what are the things that are important to the community in order to maintain the quality of life for everybody? So that's where that one comes from. Regarding the sustainability, it's the same thing. It's regulatory and programmatic. So the regulatory part, is if you're doing a home addition, or you're changing out your hot water heater, or you're building a new home, right? These are things that you are required to do when you take that step. But for somebody who's not doing that, and maybe you don't do any work on your home for like me for 20 years, and so the idea here is that there may need to be a program that is available that can help people upgrade things that they're not otherwise planning to upgrade, in order to help with energy efficiency. Some of the easy ones that we're all aware of are insulation, glazing, windows, and the type of heat sources that you're using, and the efficiency of the appliances in your home. As Commissioner Amato pointed out, we have we're fortunate in the Pacific Northwest to have different sources of electric than other parts of the country do, and it's also easier. One of the things I've been told is that it's easier when you're on a point source system. So with electrical system, it's a point source as compared to a gas appliance system. It's considered a diffuse source. So it's easier to control emissions for energy production when you're dealing with a point source. So it's easier for us to all be on electric and be able to change the generation source of electricity in order to eliminate pollutants and to be more efficient than it is for us to go out and retrofit, 300,000 gas fireplaces or gas furnaces, across the region. So that's one of the points here, is that if that's what we're trying to achieve, is the ability to quickly upgrade and improve our energy grids, well, then should we be eliminating gas appliances? And the Washington State Building Council just did that recently, where they're pushing people away from natural gas appliances, and they're promoting electric appliances. So that's a change that occurred with the building codes just recently. So great points, and thank you for the comments.
Yeah, I just real quick, I want to just check with Mike and see. So what I was thinking he was saying, and he can tell me that this is not the case, but it was a question that I had, is I believe that as we've gone through and talked about development standards, we've mostly applied those standards to short plats, long plats, kind of housing development in general, but not necessarily always set up the code with an eye on an application to somebody who just builds one house, somebody who builds their single family home. Some yes and some no. And I think somebody did raise the question of, are there still things that we have made changes to or modifications and left behind that they really only apply when you're doing a development versus when you're doing just a single family home or an infill project? And I think that's maybe a question worth just verifying. Is there anything that we should relook at for those kinds of single family home, whether that's a construction maintenance plan, construction plan or not?
I was going to come back. So that's very well stated. So yeah, it was my concern.
And there might be, one of the comments we've heard from, I think, Mary Wichter, is that there still needs to be some work done in that area. And it's more challenging for us because we are not creating lots from, that are new. They're existing lots, they're in an existing configuration, and there are property rights that those individuals have to build on those lots. So we have to be very careful about creating rules that would basically cause a taking of their private property rights. Whereas with land division, you can influence the molding of the shapes of those lots and where things go, and it's a lot easier to influence that. So we could look at things like tree retention for existing single-family lots and try to influence things like that. What we can't do is require them to reshape the lot, right? And that in itself really limits what authority we have over that property.
Yeah, I still think it's a valid topic because we should kind of just talk about exactly that, right? There's things that you can't do, but are there things you can do, whether that's construction requirements or, adjacency issues when somebody infills and tears down and builds a new house that's 3 stories tall with a flat roof against a bunch of ramblers. I mean, those are the kinds of things that probably could be at least discussed and either included or excluded for the variety of reasons you described. So that was kind of what I was thinking Mike was saying. And that's what I was thinking of too.
Thank you.
Ratuja, I know, has had her hand up for a while.
I just have 2 quick questions. So for the bonding and phasing for subdivisions, David, when you come back next time, will you be able to sort of bring some concrete examples? So for example, when we saw the Laurel development, had we had this bonding and phasing, how would that impact the subdivision? Because I'm a little unclear on that. So that is one. And then secondly, along the point of, promoting affordable housing, you mentioned our homegrown that we had worked on, I think in 2017. And I'm wondering if, because a lot of work went in there, if there are some sort of components that can be brought in as part of discussion, or just some of the research that was done then into as discussion points for phase 3 of this code. So that's just a suggestion that I had.
Yeah, that's definitely great feedback. And we just so you're aware, we did apply for a grant from the Department of Commerce for a housing action plan. And it's possible that if we receive that would be the next step in implementing Sammamish Homegrown. And you will likely be hearing quite a bit about that if we receive the grant and it does become a work item. If it doesn't become a work item through the grant, it will become a work item through the comprehensive plan update. So really what this is, I think I said this before, is what this is about is this is trying to navigate, are there changes we can make now through phase 3? And if not, we really at least want to have a conversation with the community about, housing affordability and housing diversity and how we start to implement Sammamish Homegrown through the next, phases of the city, like the 2024 comp plan update, any future development regs that might come from that. So we really just want to continue the conversation and make sure we don't lose track of it, because it is something that we hear, that it's a louder and louder message in the community that we need to make sure that we're getting that diversity in housing stock and affordability.
Okay, others with comments about phase 3? Karthik?
Yes, I have a few thoughts on this transition between zones from commercial and residential. I mean, in the current setup within Sammamish, where we have the Pine Lake QFC mall or the Safeway mall and so on and so forth, are there really areas for us to even regulate through code updates? Do we have open spaces that allow us to do this, or are we looking at possibly new commercial spaces within Sammamish. Just curious as to what this point is alluding to.
So what it's alluding to is some cities have, as they've grown and as there has been an interest in diversity in housing type and in affordability and in walkability, some cities have done what you would call a buffering or a radius around a commercial area. So the way the city's commercial areas are currently set up is you have the commercial zones, and then it immediately flips to single-family residential around it. In some cases, there's some multifamily that you might find like in R18 or something, very small areas like that in the city. But what it would allow is for you to decide to set a radius around that commercial area that is, say, 1,000 feet. Say it's a half a mile, where within that overlay, it's a zoning overlay, it would promote redevelopment, it would promote infill, maybe accessory dwelling units have different types of rules that would apply in those areas. And what it's it's recognizing that there's an opportunity for walkability and an opportunity because services are already there to put a little bit more density, not a lot, just a little bit more density around those commercial areas because there's a natural transition that already is occurring. It's common in the city of Bellevue uses it, for example. Kirkland uses it, and what it is it's kind of stepping down from that commercial core and allowing for a little more density to go in right around the edge of that commercial zone, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I understand that, but I think my main point is that does Sammamish even have an opportunity to do that? So if you're going to spend some time discussing about it and drawing codes, I think maybe we can take this offline. I would love to see where in the existing commercial zones or commercial malls that we have, such even space exists for us to kind of deliberate on the code that governs those spaces.
Yeah, I think taking a map and looking at it from a map perspective would be really a great place to go with the conversation on that.
Got it. Thank you.
Anyone else with phase 3 comments? I had one that came from some public comment, written comment that we got that might be worth at least a quick look, which is, were there any things previously proposed through the docket process in past years that were not then moved forward, either because they were really not comp plan changes, they were really code revisions, or because they were not, there was not enough capacity in the work plan to do them and they could really be handled here? And that might not be any, but it might be worth looking at the list to see if there is anything that's really a code revision that would fit in here. And it probably wouldn't take too much effort to look at the list.
That's a really great feedback. We do have a growing list over the years, and we will go through the list and see what would fit into this effort. Given that we do have some time between now and when we would bring this back, and there will be some additional work on the staffing end going into setting this up, we do have that opportunity. What we're likely to do is to revisit some of these meetings as we're working on phase 3 and walk again through these comments and through the questions that are raised and make sure that they're addressed as we proceed with ramping up phase 3, which is one of the reasons why we wanted to have this conversation tonight, is to sort of memorialize this effort and try to understand what your interests are, so that when we come back, hopefully it'll be primarily the same group. We really have enjoyed working with you, and we'll be able to then show you how we address the questions that you'd previously raised at this meeting in the future when we come back with this.
And then if I could ask a specific question, I know this is a general discussion, but in case this bonding and phasing moves forward under phase 2, I had a question. In the presentation, there were some comments about the phased development then would allow undeveloped lots to be, I don't think undisturbed was the word, but it was sort of leave some of the natural vegetation and so forth there. The word allow kind of raised my eyebrow because it seems like if that was the case, it should actually be required, or there should be something stronger than allow, because it makes it feel like, oh yeah, then the developer's not gonna cut all the trees down on the 2/3 that they're not working on right now. But it's also sometimes the case that when you have somebody coming out there with their equipment to do the work, you have them do all of it because it's cheaper than having them mobilize out again. And so I'm just wondering, are we really being realistic with ourselves in thinking that that will actually happen? Or are we convinced that it will because there's some advantage to the developer? Or are we creating some requirements that say that they can't just clear cut it just like they always have because of expediency?
I think rewording that criteria, this is something that we're in drafting on right now. So this is not the exact list of criteria that's proposed in the code. This is a paraphrasing, but I agree that could be reworded. Instead of allowing, it would result in lots remaining in a more of a relative natural state and result in less tree removal than a traditional subdivision would that doesn't do phasing or bonding. The idea here is that if we allow phasing or bonding to occur, that it will change the practice of development on the part of some of the builders who have been building a certain way, where they clear everything, they grade everything, and then they go about setting pads and putting in roads and sidewalks and gutters and et cetera. And that if they didn't do that, then when each home came in for permit, there would be more of a custom plan as to how to fit that home onto the existing lot, as opposed to right now, they're just treating the whole thing like let's just pulverize the whole thing, and then we can lay out the lots and the homes however we want. So it's really a fundamental change in culture and building. And this is one of the barriers that the builders identified for us. And in thinking about it, if you can allow a deferral of grading and of the installation of all those things, then when it does come in to be built, it could be built, right? And how do we ensure it, I think, is the big question. How do we ensure that this happens? It could be built in a way that results in less manipulation of the land.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have any comments or questions? Any of these things? I'm not seeing any.
Evan, was there another slide here?
Nope, that was the phase 3 scoping was the last slide.
Okay. So that's it for our presentation tonight. We don't have any more on the topic of development regs.
Great. Well, we will look forward to seeing phase 3 from one viewpoint or another after the first of the year, and see how the things develop next year. We'll look forward to that for sure. Okay, so let's move on to agenda-related public comments. Amber, I don't know if we need to read the statement about how to make public comments again or not, but we can move on and do agenda-related public comment.
Sure, I'm just going to remind our callers, if they wish to make a comment, to raise their hand, and that public comment allows for 7 minutes per person. And we do have a call ready now. Caller 1, you are unmuted. Please share your comment.
On. There we go. Hello, Planning Commissioners. Paul Stickney here. Good conversations this evening. Just a couple topics. I've been in real estate a long time. And by the way, Mary Wichter and I have talked quite a bit about septic systems in the city. And I just want to pass on a couple of thoughts to sort of find the right mix. I agree that in critical areas or steep slopes, there may be some issues with a drain field leach system that could potentially cause issues. But in general, on flatter sites, septics are designed, especially the newer systems, to roughly have clean water out of a drain field in less than 6 feet. So, and they're also engineers, and as I'm sure many of you know, like a school district site. You see a school district every 30, 40, or 50 years build a new building where the ball fields and the open space was, and then they put the ball fields and the open space where the old school was. Most septic systems, some were too small and shouldn't be allowed, but most have the opportunity to replace their septic tank and the distribution box and the drain fields and have enough land to swap things out so that the drain field area that failed can recharge. And 40 to 50 years later, it works. So I think all this comes down to a couple things. What's the cost to extend sewer is a key factor for how long and how far it is, as opposed to putting in a new system and drain field, which on average, higher quality, more efficient systems are going in. But at the same time, I take Mary's point that there could be circumstances, especially on steeper slopes, erosion hazard areas, et cetera, that may have a little different look. So in general, I think septics on average don't cause too much of an issue, but there are cases where they may. So I think it should be some consideration given to the type of site and the cost of sewer, and look at it from a position of fairness. I liked Josh's comments and others about the PUD, and Mark Boffman's comments, is you don't want a PUD that gets, and I hate to toss a name out, but we don't want a Highcroft look in a PUD. But at the same time, I believe, and I'd have to triple check, so don't take this as fact, but it's close. I believe in the Laurel's plat. I believe those houses are close to 2,000 to 2,500 feet. So that begs a very interesting question. We know the community doesn't like the look of the 4,000 to 5,000 foot houses like in Maple Leaf and Highcroft, really close to each other, no doubt. But this raises a very interesting one. Could 2,000 square foot houses be close or not? See, so is adding a housing affordability and, diverse missing middle houses, if you couldn't see it, if those are close together, is that okay? So I think it's an interesting question to be asked. I don't really advocate one way or the other on that. I think that would be good for a community discussion. So in summary, if you can't see it, I agree that we don't want to add more really large houses on small lots. But what about smaller houses on smaller lots? I think that's an interesting policy discussion to have in our community. And in Karthik's comment and David's good discussion about where things could go, there's quite a bit of space in roughly 1% of our city now and 1% in the future. The town center area is about 2% of the city area, but when you take away City Hall and the roughly 1/3 to 40% open space from many different sources and roads, leaves about 1% of our city land for potential development. Some of it will be commercial, so there could be opportunities for these different scaled down housing types that we're talking about. And then in redevelopment on our 3 existing centers, which is the QFC in Klahani, the QFC in Pine Lake, and Safeway in the Highlands, easiest way to know them by the stores. That's about 1% of our city area. And keep in mind, those have tremendous impervious surfaces right now. Town center will have way less impervious surface on a per acre basis compared to those existing developments. So there's opportunity in those someday, not right away, to redevelop in a little different scale with less impervious surface and have a good mix of housing and commercial. So those are just my extemporaneous comments, nothing written, just based on what you said tonight, speaking off the top of my head about the things that you talked about. It was a good meeting, good discussions, and agree with a lot of the phase 3 scoping. And that's it in less than 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Stickney. And if there's anyone else who wants to make a comment, please raise your hand. If you're calling in, you can also push *9. All right, we do have another caller. One moment. Caller 2, you're able to give comment now.
Hi, this is Mary Wichter. Hi, I was muted, unmuted, and I think I'm unmuted now. This is Mary Wichter. I did want to talk about a few things, and first of all, I wanted to say really great inputs, questions, discussions today. And there is one thing I wanted to bring up that was on page 247 of 331 of the City Council packet from Tuesday, October 19th. And it was written by our legislative people, Luke and Nick, who are lobbyists. And it's just a letter about what's coming up in the 2022 legislative session. And it's related to housing affordability and density. It says there's one expected proposal in particular that they want to bring the attention to the city that they feel will almost certainly be offered in the upcoming section, and that is to mandate that all cities allow duplexes on every single residential lot, or at least in more urbanized areas. And you can read the full paragraph yourself, but it mentions that 2019 Oregon passed their House Bill 2001 doing such things, and also last month the California state had passed their Senate Bill 9, which mandates duplexes and split lots be allowed on residential lots. I'm also from Bozeman, Montana, and I attend meetings there. There's some more discussions on what they actually have been studying to analyze affordable housing, and putting duplexes on existing single-family lots is one of the primary things that people think you can do to get affordable housing, not just housing affordability, but affordable housing and get diversity. The second thing that I want to talk about is Paul Stickney had talked on septics, and there are a lot of places in the city where we just don't have the space to be able to do what he talked about. If you don't have flat land and you don't have space, you can't put a septic. A lot of times replacing a septic and meeting new codes costs $30,000, $50,000. It's not cheap either, and we do need to have sewers in urban areas. There's a lot of there's 3,500 septics in the city. A lot of them are older, failing or pre-failing. Bellevue only has 1,200. Redmond and Issaquah are lower than 500. We need to do something because with our 3,500 septics, there's only about 40 that convert a year. It will take a long time to get them to done. So we do need to talk about septics in phase 3. And I know that that was looked at in phase 2 and it got a little bit too complicated. So anything we can do in phase 2 should be done. And then phase 3 definitely needs to include that. And then I also sent in an email because I had spoken at City Council on changes that I'd like to see in the development regs phase 2 for Exhibit 1. Florida area ratios and new design standards should apply to single-family homes and not just subdivisions. Clearing and grading, use a % of lot area in addition to the square foot thresholds, and then whichever is smaller. We did that in the stormwater code, and that's worked really well. Unreasonable use exceptions, the Planning Commission had said, hey, when this gets looked at by City Council, it needs some more looks, and there is work done there. If we have illegal situations, they need to be able to be recovered from. I've seen a lot of those happen, and they're just kind of left that way forever. So that should be added. And then for dockets or anything that hasn't been put in, it would be great if we can get those in, as was brought up by Mark Bachman. So anyway, you can read the emails I sent in, and I can also send the one page that I read on the legislative upcomings on the duplexes. And that's all I wanted to talk about in 3 minutes today instead of 7.
Thank you, Ms. Wichter. That is the completion of our callers for public comment.
Great, thanks, Amber. It's not a complete planning commission meeting unless we hear from both Paul and Mary.
Thank you.
Okay, I wanted to take a second, unless Evan was going to do this, and just mention everybody to take a look at the calendar that was included in the packet, just to be aware that right now we have scheduled a November 4th meeting, which is a public hearing on docket requests. And then we have on the calendar a December 2nd meeting, which I'll hold this up here. I don't know with the background, it's not working. Some of you probably got these cards. I can't make it work with my background turned on, about the visioning project to get people to go to the website and provide input on the visions for Sammamish. So make sure you take advantage of that. And that's what we have scheduled for the rest of the year. Evan or David, do we have anything else for this evening?
Nothing else to note right now.
Nothing from me, thank you.
Great. Would someone move to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, no. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice evening, and we'll look forward to seeing you on November 4th.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Night.